My stepmother Linda looked me dead in the eye with a sneer that could curdle milk, the kind of look she usually reserved for the hired help, or a persistent stain on her white marble floors, and said, "There's no room for you at New Year's this year. We want a real family celebration. Perhaps you could find a nice quiet deli that serves lonely career women. I hear the coleslaw is divine." The emphasis she put on the word real was a jagged edge, a verbal razor meant to remind me that despite my bloodline and the checks I signed, I was forever an outsider in the very house my own mother had meticulously designed and helped build with her own savings. I didn't flinch. I simply smiled, a slow, practiced expression of professional indifference I'd perfected in high-stakes boardrooms, tucked a stray lock of hair behind my ear, and told her it was cool. Honestly, Linda, I was worried my work hard, earn money aura might clash with the spend other people's money aesthetic you've worked so hard to curate, I added dryly. I waited for the flicker of smug triumph to settle in her eyes, savoring the silence before delivering the killing blow. "That's fine, Linda. Then I'll just go ahead and cancel the $5,000 family dinner at the Waldorf Astoria that I'd already paid for in full. I'm sure they can find someone else to take our prime table overlooking the park on the busiest night of the year. Maybe a family that actually likes each other." The look of sheer, unadulterated horror that washed over her face was better than any firework display I'd ever seen over the East River. It was a physical collapse. Her posture slumped, her hand flying to her throat, as if I'd just cut off her oxygen supply, or more accurately, her access to social relevance. She actually gasped, a dry, rattling sound that betrayed her panic, and stammered, "Wait, Sloan, reconsider, we were just thinking of the seating arrangements. We didn't mean it that way. I mean, who doesn't love the Waldorf? It's practically our ancestral home for the night." But the ship hadn't just sailed. It had been blown out of the water by the torpedo of her own arrogance. It was the ultimate gotcha moment, the kind of cinematic justice you only see in prestige TV dramas, but this was my life. And after a decade of being a silent spectator to my own exploitation, I was finally holding the remote. For years, I had played the dual role of the ATM and the emotional punching bag for the Sterling family. It was a role I had accepted out of a lingering, desperate hope, a ghost of a childhood wish that eventually, if I provided enough luxury, if I was successful enough, I'd finally be considered enough to love. But as I stood in their pristine, over-decorated living room in Greenwich, Connecticut, a room that smelled of expensive lilies and the faint metallic scent of old money I'd largely provided through my own sweat and tears, I felt a lightness I hadn't known since the day my mother's casket was lowered into the Texas soil. "Nice rug, Linda," I remarked, glancing at the floor. "It really captures the essence of, I didn't pay for this, but I'll claim it's a family heirloom." My father David was a study in cowardice and moral rot. He just stood there by the fireplace staring at his expensive Italian leather shoes as if they contained the secrets of the universe, proving once again that he was more interested in keeping his trophy wife's temper at bay than protecting his firstborn daughter. "David, say something," Linda hissed. He didn't even have the courage to meet my gaze. He just adjusted his gold watch, another birthday gift from me, and sighed as if he were the victim of a particularly aggressive tax audit. "Sloan, let's not be hasty," he managed. "Think of the champagne. My half-brother Jason was the byproduct of their shared vanity and my enabling. He was too busy scrolling on his new iPhone 15 Pro Max, the one I'd bought him for his 21st birthday just last month, to encourage his non-existent studies to even look up from his TikTok feed. At least not until the word refund hit the air like a lead pipe hitting a glass table. The screen went dark, and for the first time in years, he looked at me with something other than bored entitlement. "Yo, wait," he piped up. "Is the caviar still happening? My TikTok followers need that aesthetic." Suddenly, the room was silent save for the rhythmic, mocking ticking of a grandfather clock that seemed to be counting down the seconds until their carefully curated social standing collapsed. They had built their entire identity in Greenwich on the myth of old money and family values, using my high-flying Manhattan career as the secret foundation. They thought they'd won by excluding me from their real family, playing on my supposed vulnerability and my innate need for belonging. But they had miscalculated the math of my resilience. I had spent my 30s learning that belonging is a luxury you provide for yourself, not something you beg for from people who view you as a commodity. I had an ace up my sleeve that involved a lot of zeros, a very influential friend named Marcus, and a heart that had finally mercifully turned to stone. The social hierarchy they worshipped was built on my dime, and I was about to stop the payments and watch the whole structure tilt into the Atlantic. "Don't worry, Jason," I said, heading for the door. "I'll tag you in my selfie from the Waldorf. It'll be the ultimate FOMO experience for you." That moment changed everything, but it had been a long time coming. A slow, agonizing erosion of my patience over a decade of being used as a human credit card. I had spent those years grinding in the trenches of high-stakes corporate law in Midtown, climbing from a junior associate who lived on lukewarm coffee and pure spite to a senior partner who commanded rooms of powerful men twice my age. While I was billing 80-hour weeks and battling migraines to secure their comfort, my family treated my success as a collective resource, a communal well. They were entitled to poison while they drank from it greedily. I remember the early days coming home for the holidays with my first big bonus, only to have Linda critique my pedestrian choice of handbag while simultaneously asking if I could cover the landscaping bill for their country estate. "It's a bit department store, isn't it, dear?" she'd cooed, reaching for my checkbook. I had provided the down payment for their vacation home in the Hamptons, funded the private tutors that dragged Jason through high school, and quietly settled my father's mounting debts from his failed angel investment schemes, which mostly involved buying overpriced Napa wine and calling it diversified holdings. Each act of generosity was met with a new demand, a subtle shift in the goalposts of their affection. I was the silent partner in their luxury, the invisible engine driving their social ascent. Every Thanksgiving, I was the one who flew in the organic turkeys from a farm in Vermont and hired the private chefs to ensure Linda didn't have to lift a finger. Every Christmas, I was the one shipping crates of luxury goods from Bergdorf Goodman to their doorstep, only to find my own modest gifts, usually a generic candle or a half-hearted gift card tucked away in the back of a guest closet. "Oh, we thought you already had everything," Linda would chirp while sporting the diamond earrings I'd suggested my father buy her with my money. And every Super Bowl party, I was the one footing the bill for the top-shelf bourbon and the 5-star catering from the city. Despite this mountain of generosity, the script never changed. I was consistently seated at the kids' table, alongside Jason's rowdy fraternity friends, or ignored entirely, while Linda held court bragging about Jason's mediocre achievements at a third-tier college he'd barely gotten into, and only then because I'd made a substantial contribution to the dean's fund. The hypocrisy was breathtaking, a masterclass in psychological gaslighting. They loved the prestige my money bought. They just didn't love the person who earned it. To them, I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was a utility, like a high-functioning appliance or a reliable insurance policy that paid for their vacations, their country club memberships, and their unearned social cachet. I had become a ghost in my own narrative, a signature on a check that they tried to erase from the family portraits. "I hope you enjoy the real family vibe tonight," I told them as I gripped the doorknob. "Maybe you can bond over the shared experience of having to check your bank balances for the first time in a decade." This New Year's Eve was supposed to be the Grand Sterling Gala, the crowning achievement of Linda's decade-long social climbing. It was a seat at the most exclusive table in New York City, a night intended to show off their supposed wealth and my connections to Linda's inner circle of Greenwich gossips who thrived on status. This wasn't just about dinner. It was about the social currency that comes with being seen at the Waldorf on the most important night of the calendar. It was meant to be the final validation of Linda's meticulously crafted persona as a woman of elite standing. "Think of the photos, Sloane," she'd pleaded earlier that month. "We need to look like the Kennedys, not the people from your hometown." I had arranged it all through Marcus, a partner at a global private equity firm who practically owned half of the real estate in Midtown and owed me more than a few favors after I'd spent 6 exhausting months saving his firm from a predatory multi-billion-dollar lawsuit that would have decimated his reputation. I had spent months coordinating with the Waldorf's elite concierge to ensure every detail was perfect. The vintage Krug champagne, the custom 7-course tasting menu featuring their favorites, the prime view of the Times Square ball drop from a safe, luxurious distance. I had even arranged for a private car to whisk them from Greenwich to Manhattan, wanting still foolishly for them to feel proud of me. Marcus actually asked if I was bringing my charming family, I mused to myself. I'll have to tell him I decided to bring my self-respect instead. It takes up much less room at the table. But when I arrived at their house a week early with the confirmation papers in my bag, hoping for even a fleeting moment of genuine connection or perhaps a simple, honest thank you, Linda decided it was time for one last power move. She thought I'd beg for her approval, as I had so many times in my 20s when I was still desperate for a scrap of validation. She thought she could humiliate me by withdrawing the family card, thinking I'd offer even more money just to be included in the photos for her Instagram feed. She thought she could satisfy her own deep-seated insecurity by reminding me that I was just the Texas girl who worked too hard to be truly sophisticated. The implications of her exclusion were clear. I was good enough to pay the bills, but not refined enough to sit at the table. It was a tactical error. She had forgotten that the girl who fought her way out of a small Texas town and into a corner office in Manhattan didn't just have a bank account, she had a strategy. Instead, I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and hit Request Refund through the Black Card concierge service right in front of her. The notification pinged on my screen within seconds, a digital symphony of liberation that signaled the end of my tenure as their silent benefactor. Look at that, Linda, I showed her the screen. A $5,000 unfamily tax. It's my favorite kind of write-off. Reconsider. I echoed my voice as cold as a Boston winter and twice as sharp. I looked at the three of them, the coward who sold his soul for peace, the narcissist who fed on my labor, and the parasite who didn't know the value of $1. I realized that by trying to buy their love, I had only succeeded in financing my own obsolescence in their lives. I think I've spent quite enough on people who don't even like me. Enjoy your McDonald's on New Year's, Linda. Or maybe you can try to pay the Waldorf with all that real family spirit you're so proud of. I hear the prestige is very filling, though it's a bit low on actual nutrients. I didn't wait for a response, and I didn't look back. I walked out of that house, the sharp rhythmic sound of my Louboutin heels on their polished hardwood floors, sounding like a gavel bringing a long, exhausting, and fundamentally unfair trial to a permanent, non-negotiable close. I felt the cool Connecticut air hit my face, and for the first time in years, I could breathe without the weight of their expectations pressing down on my chest. The silence of the night was a beautiful, expensive luxury. Next time I'll buy myself a yacht, I whispered to the night air. At least a boat won't try to tell me I'm not real enough to ride it. The next morning, I knew what I had to do, and it started with a trip to a Starbucks in Times Square to meet Marcus. The air was crisp, filled with the frantic, hopeful energy of a city preparing for the new year, a stark contrast to the stagnant, suffocating toxicity of my father's house. I grew up in a small town in Texas where my father ran a struggling hardware store before he met Linda and her big dreams that mysteriously coincided with my mother's life insurance policy payout. I had worked 3 jobs to get through NYU, sleeping on subways when I missed the late train and eating street cart pretzels to save every penny for tuition, never asking for a dime from home because I knew there was no safety net. Meanwhile, they lived off the remnants of my mother's legacy, dressing Jason in designer clothes, while I wore thrift store blazers to my first law firm interviews. I remembered the nights I spent eating ramen in a cramped, unheated dorm while they sent me photos of their lavish vacation in Napa Valley, a trip paid for by a trust fund my mother had set up for my education, but which Linda had somehow managed into her own accounts through a series of questionable legal maneuvers I was too young and too grief-stricken to understand at the time. The contrast was a constant ache, a reminder that my survival was a solitary endeavor. "Marcus, I hope you're ready for some high-level pettiness," I said as he sat down. "I'm looking to audit some family values." The resentment had fermented over the years into a fine, sharp wine, and now I was finally ready to drink. As I sat across from Marcus, who looked every bit the billionaire in his tailored charcoal suit and a watch that cost more than my father's house, I didn't feel like the victim anymore. I felt like a strategist preparing for a hostile takeover of my own life. I had spent years analyzing the weaknesses of corporate giants. It was time to apply those skills to my own family's fragile facade. "They want to play games, Marcus," I said, sliding a thick leather-bound folder across the table. "I want to see how they play when the Bank of Sloan is permanently closed and the IRS starts asking questions about that sterling hardware expansion in 2018 that never actually happened. I call it Project Reality Check." Marcus grinned, his eyes gleaming with the kind of predatory intelligence that made him a legend on Wall Street. "Sloan, you know I love a good restructuring. This isn't just a breakup. It's a total liquidation of their unearned assets. Plus, I've always found Greenwich a bit too humid for people with secrets. Consider it done." I spent the next few days in my New York office, a glass-walled sanctuary 40 stories above the Hudson River, meticulously documenting every cent I'd ever given them. My intuition had always been my greatest asset in the courtroom, and it served me well here. A few months prior, I'd noticed glaring discrepancies in the family business filings that my father asked me to glance at for a loan application. Being a lawyer, I didn't just glance. I scrutinized every line of fine print, every footnote, every offshore routing number. I found a trail of consulting fees paid to Linda's brother that looked suspiciously like tax evasion and money laundering. They were using my reputation and my professional network as a shield, hiding their messy illegal finances behind my clean record and my name. They had luxury-wrapped their crimes in my integrity. I had stayed quiet out of a misplaced sense of loyalty, a ghost of the girl who still wanted her daddy's love. But Linda's sneer had severed that tie for good. I spent my lunch breaks talking to forensic accountants who owed me favors and my evenings at happy hour with colleagues who knew exactly how to squeeze a debtor until they gasped. The plan was simple. I wasn't just taking back my New Year's dinner, I was taking back my life, my mother's stolen money, and the dignity they'd tried to strip from me piece by piece. "I've invoiced them for emotional labor at my standard hourly rate," I joked to my paralegal, totaling approximately eternity. The call started on the 27th. Linda's name flashed on my screen no less than 50 times in a single afternoon. When I finally answered, her voice was a frantic vibrato, stripped of its usual condescension and replaced by a hollow desperation. "Sloan, honey, there must be a mistake. The hotel says the reservation is gone. We have the Van Burens coming. You can't do this. Think of the embarrassment. I already told everyone we'd be drinking the 1996 Dom Perignon." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, swirling a pen and watching the sunset over the Jersey City skyline, feeling a profound sense of peace. "I'm not doing anything, Linda. I'm just practicing fiscal responsibility. Isn't that what you told me when you sold my mother's engagement ring to pay for Jason's spring break in Cabo? It's just business, you said. Well, this is my business now. Maybe the Van Burens will settle for some sparkling cider and the company of their real friends." The silence on the other end was heavy, suffocating. I could almost hear her brain scrambling for a new angle, a way to manipulate the good daughter, one last time. The irony was rich. She was Gio de dang nai ni su hien dien ma ko I dacho la kong sheng dang vue mot gia din tuk su. "We're family, Sloan. Think of your father. He's been so stressed, he started eating gluten again." My father, the man who let her sell that ring, and then told me I was being dramatic for crying about it. My father can call me himself if he has something to say, but tell him to make sure he's checked the mail first. There's a certified letter from my firm regarding the consulting payments. I suggest he hires a very good lawyer, though I hear they're expensive. Perhaps he can trade some of those wine investments for legal advice. I hung up before she could start the waterworks. Always a pleasure, Linda, I whispered to the dial tone. Next time, try being nice. It's significantly cheaper. I wasn't just being petty, I was being precise, applying the same rigor to my family that I applied to a multi-billion-dollar merger. Growing up in Texas, I'd learned that you don't start a fight unless you intend to finish it, and you certainly don't leave any loose ends. My mother had been a woman of grace, a teacher who believed in the American dream of hard work and kindness. After she died, Linda moved in like a hurricane, replacing my mother's floral curtains with cold, modern art, and replacing my presence in the family with Jason. I was relegated to the guest room, then the attic. Then eventually, I was just the girl who sent checks from New York while being treated like an unwanted guest in my own childhood home. They thought my success was their reward for raising me, ignoring the fact that I'd raised myself in the library and at the office while they spent my inheritance. I remembered a Black Friday 5 years ago when I'd flown home to surprise them with a new SUV. I'd walked in to find them laughing about how uptight and career-obsessed I was, while Linda was already picking out the leather interior for the car she knew I was bringing. I'd given them the keys anyway, hoping to buy a seat at their table. What a fool I'd been to think love could be a transaction where the currency was always my own self-respect. I'm finally liquidating that investment, I told my reflection. And the return is going to be magnificent. By the 29th, the desperation had turned into a full-blown siege. My father called sounding tired, defeated, and suddenly very old. Sloan, please. Linda is a wreck. She's promised to apologize. She even said she'd let you pick the wine next time. Just put the money back. We can't afford that dinner on our own, and the social fallout will ruin us in Greenwich. People will talk. They'll think we're middle class. I felt a pang of sadness, not for him, but for the man he used to be before he traded his spine for a quiet life with a woman who didn't respect him. Dad, the social fallout is the least of your worries. Why is there $200,000 missing from Mom's estate that went into a shell company in Delaware, registered to Linda's brother? Is that part of the real family fund? He choked on his breath, a sound of genuine shock. Or perhaps just caught out fear. I didn't know about that. Linda handled the taxes and the estate papers. I trusted her. I knew he was likely lying, or at least willfully ignorant, which was just as bad. Then she can handle the audit, Dad. I'm done being the buffer. I'm done being the insurance policy for your poor choices. Tell Linda that if she wants to talk about real family, we can discuss it in front of a judge. They love a good family reunion. The climax happened on New Year's Eve, not at the Waldorf, but at a high-end restaurant in Nashville, where I knew they'd retreated to try and save face with a smaller, more intimate gathering. They didn't know I was in town. I arrived with Marcus and a legal team looking like $1 million in a black silk jumpsuit and diamonds I'd bought for myself. We walked into the restaurant just as the main course was being served, a mediocre steak compared to what they would have had in Manhattan. The table was filled with Linda's friends, the kind of people who only value you for your zip code and the designer labels on your back. Linda saw me, and her face drained of color, turning a ghostly shade of gray that matched her silk dress. She tried to stand her wine glass trembling in her hand. Sloan, what are you doing here? This is a private celebration. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I walked over, leaned down, and whispered loud enough for the whole table to hear. I'm here to settle the bill, Linda. But not this one. The one from 10 years ago. Also, you have spinach in your teeth. It's very real family of me to tell you. I handed a set of documents to the man sitting next to her, a prominent local auditor who coincidentally was an old friend of Marcus. I believe you'll find the evidence of the sterling hardware embezzlement and the misappropriation of the Reynolds estate quite interesting, Mr. Henderson. It's light reading for New Year's. The fallout was spectacular, a swift and brutal demolition of a house of cards. Within an hour, the friends had vanished, leaving Linda and my father with a cold steak and a mountain of legal trouble. The Van Burens. The people she was so desperate to impress were the first to leave whispering about scandal and unrefined behavior. I stood there watching the wreckage of their reputation, and for the first time, I felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, just a profound sense of closure. Linda began to wail a high-pitched, ugly sound, accusing me of ruining her life. "You ruined your own life the moment you thought my mother's death was a payday," I told her. "I'm just the one collecting the debt. And believe me, Linda, I always collect. Happy New Year. I hope you enjoy the leftovers. I hear they're very authentic." In the weeks that followed, I took back what was mine with clinical efficiency. I sued for the misappropriated funds from my mother's estate and won a summary judgment. My father and Linda had to sell the big house in Connecticut and the SUV. Jason had to actually get a job at a Starbucks, an irony that wasn't lost on me. "I'll take a venti latte, Jason," I'd joked in my head. "Extra foam, just like your education." I didn't enjoy their suffering, but I relished the justice. I used the recovered money to start the Eleanor Sterling Foundation in my mother's name, providing full-ride scholarships for girls from small Texas towns who wanted to study law or finance in the big city. I moved my operations to a new office in Silicon Valley, seeking a fresh start away from the ghosts of the East Coast. The last time I saw them was in a courtroom in Chicago where the final settlements were signed. Linda looked aged, her designer clothes replaced by something off the rack at Target, her arrogance replaced by a hollow, desperate resentment. She tried to approach me, her eyes red-rimmed. "Sloan, please. We have nothing left. Join us for a quiet dinner. Just us like a family. We found a great coupons for Red Lobster." I looked at her, then at my father, who wouldn't even meet my gaze. "I already have a family," I said, nodding toward Marcus and my best friend Emma, who were waiting for me by the door. "They're the people who didn't need a $5,000 dinner to want me around. They're the ones who were there when I had nothing but a law degree and a grudge. Enjoy the cheddar biscuits, Linda. I hear they're the only thing real left in your life." I walked out of that courthouse and into the bright, biting wind of a Chicago afternoon. I felt powerful, resilient, and entirely whole. I took my shot, I played my hand, and I realized that true strength isn't just about winning the battle. It's about having the clarity to see exactly where the lines were drawn. For too long, I had allowed them to blur the boundaries between my generosity and their entitlement. No more. The cold wind didn't make me shiver. It made me feel sharp. I had spent years being the architect of everyone else's comfort, designing lives for people who would have left me out in the storm without a second thought. Now I was the sole owner of my own destiny. Every dollar I had reclaimed wasn't just currency. It was a symbol of every hour I'd worked while they played, every tear I'd hidden while they mocked my ambition, and every piece of my mother's legacy they had tried to erase. The consequences of my actions weren't just financial, they were structural. I watched as the Sterling family name, a name I once carried with a mix of pride and obligation, became a footnote in a local scandal report. It wasn't because I was cruel, but because the truth is a heavy burden for those who have lived on a diet of lies. Linda's panic when the refunds hit, my father's silence in the face of my resolve. Jason's realization that his world of luxury was built on sand, these weren't just moments of payback. They were the inevitable result of a toxic dynamic finally reaching its breaking point. I had provided the platform for their vanity, and when I pulled it away, I didn't just take the Waldorf Astoria dinner. I took the mirrors they used to convince themselves they were superior. I felt a surge of pride knowing that the young girl from Texas, the one who worked 3 jobs and slept on a literal attic floor, had finally secured the perimeter. I was no longer a daughter seeking approval. I was a woman who had defined her own worth and found that it was far greater than anything they could ever offer or take away. As I walked toward the waiting black car, I thought about the concept of family. We are taught that blood is thicker than water, but in the trenches of real life, I learned that loyalty is thicker than anything. Marcus and Emma were there, not because I paid them, but because we had built a fortress of mutual respect and shared battles. They were my real family celebration. The grand Sterling Gala was dead replaced by something much more authentic, a group of people who actually cared if I was at the table. I took one last look at the gray courthouse steps, a symbol of the institutional justice I had used to dismantle their domestic tyranny, and I felt a profound sense of peace. I had reclaimed my name, my mother's memory, and my future. I had taken the bricks they threw at me and used them to build a skyscraper. I rebuilt my life on a foundation of truth, rather than gold-plated lies. As I boarded a plane back to San Francisco, I looked out the window at the sprawling American landscape below. My mother used to say that the American dream wasn't about what you owned, but about the freedom to walk away from anyone who tried to own you. I finally understood what she meant. I was Sloane Sterling, and I didn't need anyone's permission to be great. I had the last laugh, and it sounded exactly like silence, the beautiful, expensive silence of a life well lived.